I was wondering if you have any things that you do on a personal level to like increase more transparency in yourself, especially things that you don't feel totally confident about or that you're still working on or still building up the skills around. So just kind of curious how you make that personal for yourself.
Well, I think I'd reference the start of the talk in the slaying of the dragon. As a small example of like, let me make you transparent. Like, I haven't been this nervous for a talk in like a decade. I was like having a panic attack walking over here. Tina started talking to me and I was like, okay, I'm interacting with somebody. This is good. I can't just be stuck in my own head anymore. I don't know why. It's like deeply like one word talk scaring the heck out of me. So I don't know, that'd be a small example. Maybe not what you're looking for. So I guess my question would be like, hey, like what kind of relationship in my life? You mean with like my wife? Do you mean with like, you know, employees? Like how do you, to get specific, it's hard to. So the question is like, hey, like maybe something, you know, you're not certain about or what have you. Are you being transparent enough? Something like this. Like, here's what I just say is a great way to constantly work that process of improving the transparency you put out in the world is to ask for feedback. Okay? Because people will tell you if you're not getting through to them or they misunderstand. All right? And so I would encourage if you care about this, like, you know, you may think you're being transparent. Why don't you ask those who you're trying to communicate with and see where they're at? Does that make sense? So that's the best, and then that starts the process of like, oh, I got to keep asking. Yeah.
Well, my question is, you talk a lot about transparency and the positive side of it, but don't you think there is a negative side also? When is like transparency becomes, I don't know, control? You know, like people feel like they're watched, not that they have a choice to be transparent.
So I just want to make sure I understand the question. So it's like, when does transparency go too far? When do people feel watched? Is that kind of?
Exactly. Like even, you know, the glass doors, like, don't you think some people might feel like it compromises their privacy?
Yeah, so I'll give an example. So okay, our office, we designed for three C's, we call them: collaboration, connectedness, and collaboration, connectedness, and what the hell's the other one? It's the 3 C's, I can tell you that much. And so we use a lot of glass. And there we go, blanking. We use a lot of glass. Like all the meeting rooms are glass, except we have like an HR area that's a little like off. So if you need to go and speak with somebody, like, so I think it's like you gotta use a little. It's a real judgment call. I actually gave this talk to FreshBookers just as a warm up, and they helped me work on it a little. And you know, there's like, hey, like I think you have to apply judgment to how much is too much to reveal, and then the watching part, like, I don't know. I think of it more as like, hey, you don't need to hide. I'm not hiding, so you don't need to hide, which to me is a more positive versus than I'm trying to watch you, if that makes sense.
Hi, you talk about transparency being really important in building your culture and having a really great culture. And you mentioned that there's 9 characteristics that you look for in employees.
Yeah.
Is that something, I'd love to know what they are, but also is that something you share, you know, in your communications and marketing?
So we have 9 values at FreshBooks, and I wish the list was shorter, but it's not. And there's actually our 10th value is invisible. It's actually secrecy, which is interesting, right? So like, hey, we're going to share all the financial information with you folks, but you know, you can't let it leave the building. Like that's the rule. Anyway, so they're 9. There's an acronym, Porchfest. It's like, you know, and I've learned about creating values, but they're one word and then they have a definition out of them. So passion, it's like, hey, if if you weren't doing it, you love what you do, you're constantly working on your craft, and if you weren't doing it here, you'd be doing it somewhere else because you're that passionate about what you do. That's the kind of, you know, sort of 9 values that we have. I could itemize them, but I think some may fall asleep. So how do we keep them alive? We do it a couple ways. One is like you're introduced to them as soon as you know, first day on the company. It's like in that first month, like you get this like, you know, onboarding thing, and it's like starts with the values. And then the other thing is like we have them like hanging in banners as we like in a very central area on the way to like the dining hall area. So you're walking past them every day. And then finally, we actually do a little thing where if you see somebody who's like really living their value, you can just give them like a little gift card. And then, we have like usually like 150 of those that'll happen a quarter. And we'll pick like 3 and tell those stories at all company meetings just to kind of, reinforce. It's about like, important thing about building a company and creating a culture is you actually want to reinforce. It's not about penalizing the negative behaviors so much as it is about like reinforcing the positive ones, right? So when people are living the values, we like to double down on that and kind of give feedback in those terms.
Hi, I'm really fascinated by keeping a relatively large company feeling like a small group of people, and I think that's really great. I'm curious how the AODA has impacted, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disability Act has influenced communication around a topic that many people find very difficult to communicate, particularly with your focus on customer service and interacting with people on a telephone.
Okay, so just to, so how has the AODA and accessibility in general influenced like the business and the culture, or
how has it been possible to have a high degree of communication and transparency around a topic that's always hard for people to talk about?
Around a topic that's always hard for people to talk about? Sorry, I just want to make sure I...
Yeah, so
Okay.
it's often
So-
difficult to communicate with someone who's not like you. How has your transparency helped that process for employees?
So I think, I just think of these things as like, it's what you kind of do and how you behave that matters, okay? And so, like the building is like, accessible and you can get to it easily, and we care about that stuff. We also have one woman who on our service team who just does email because she actually is hearing impaired. And so I'll just give the example of like some things we've done to support her, right? So whenever we have all company meetings and things like that, we don't do signs. She's really good with like lip reading, but she sits up close and we make sure she can do that. But one of the coolest things that I've seen is our support team, they constantly like huddle. They have like daily huddles and like weekly huddles and stuff like that. And so she actually has they're like on the floor, like just like in an open space. We've actually taped out like a little box where she stands, right? And so whoever is speaking is then responsible for knowing that she's there and being visible for her so she can follow along. And so I think acts like that, right, and ensuring there's like elevator access and things like this, create a space where people are more comfortable talking about these things. I could be wrong, but I would say that's something we have done, which demonstrates we're open, that I think then has secondary effects where it's like, hey, we can talk about this. Make sense?
This is a great talk, especially since I work in a place that doesn't have a lot of transparency, so I really appreciate this. One of the challenges I want to ask you about is how do you keep growing transparency when you get to a much bigger size than being able to know people by their first names? And you often see that fall apart in big companies.
So a couple thoughts. Dunbar's number, 150 people. Okay, and I think I referenced a talk I gave. I told Tina about it. I think I mentioned it. It's hard to remember sometimes what you said when you actually give a talk. But I gave this talk for like, when we got the designation as like best company to work for. And I talked about all these challenges we had at different stages, okay? And, communication just gets harder. Transparency just gets harder as you have more people. So let me tell you like how I've approached it. Was really concerned about the number 150 people. I don't know if y'all are aware of this, but when a community gets more than 150 people, it like breaks the human brain and their ability to sustain relationships and things like this. And a couple interesting things happened when we crossed over that line. Like 150 people going along, literally like 151 people in the company. I'm walking down the hall, right, going somewhere, and people are looking at their shoes. Or like these couple of people looking at their shoes, like looking sideways. I'm like, whoa, we've been at this for like 10 years. Like no one's looked at their shoes when they pass me in the hallway. We're always looking at each other's eyes. And so did a couple things. First of all, before 150, because I knew this was kind of coming, I said, listen, let me tell you what I want this place to be. I want FreshBooks to be like the world's greatest cocktail party, okay? So you're in a place where you've been invited, right? And it's like, you know that there's some degree of connection with everyone else in the room, but you may not know everybody. And so you might be talking with a friend, but because it's a trusted source of other people in the room, like you probably want to meet those other people, and if you do, it's going to be awesome. And so expectation is, if you do not know somebody yet, right, introduce yourself. Right? And say hello. So that's the default expectation. You come in the door for everybody. And then for the hallway thing, so that worked really well and still does, but the hallway thing happened after that. It's because like you're walking by, you're not going to necessarily just stop and I would, but not everybody else does. Anyways, came up with this one. So I was like, okay, this just happened. We talked about the cocktail party. New rule, right? Here's the expectation for all of you. Heads up, hello. You're always heads up, looking someone in the eye, just a quick hello. Like just set the expectation that that's how we're going to behave. And what I've been amazed by is like no one's looked at their shoes since, right? And that was like, I don't know, a year, because it just happens. Like people just like it's like it's the culture, right? And so this is why I think culture hacks matter. And on that note, thank you.